Hello YouTube Diverse, this is WaterDive 122 and I want to welcome you all back to another episode of Magic Metal Mondays. Now, on the previous episode, we did an album review where we talked about my favorite album of all time, which was Hemispheres by Rush. And we are going to be back with another album review here today. So, for this video, I decided to review my second favorite album of all time, and if you have followed me since the very start, you know what that album is. That is Tales from Topographic Oceans by Yes, released in 1973. Now, this album I have talked to death on this channel. I've mentioned it in countless videos here on this channel, and really on this series of mine. I talked about it in Albums of the Year. I've talked about it in Albums of the Year saga. I've talked about it on my top 10 albums video. I've talked about it on my Yes album rankings that I did several months back. And you know, I've just talked endlessly about this record, but I felt like I've never really went into detail of why this is my second favorite album of all time. And why I love it the way I do. So, all those questions will be answered here on this video. And we'll be starting to get more diverse into bands that I absolutely adore and albums that I absolutely adore. Because there's a lot of albums that I want to review. I just need to figure out how am I going to put them all in the order that I want to review them in. Goodness gracious, I can't talk today. Now, so let's get started here. So we are going to be, Tales from Topographic Oceans by Yes. So, here we go. So, as I said, this album was released in 1973, and if you remember from my Albums of the Year 1970s video, you likely remembered that this record was my favorite album from 1973, and that's saying something because 1973 had a lot of great albums. You had, I mean, just to name a few, you had Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd, which is another one of my all-time favorites. You have Sabbath Bloody Sabbath by Black Sabbath. You have the debut album by Sammy Hagar's first band. I can't remember I don't remember what their band name is called, but you know, that album has some pretty good stuff. You have Selling England by the Pound by Genesis. The list just goes on and on and on. But in my opinion, there's not a greater 1973 album than Tales from Topographic Oceans, and I will get to that in the review. So this is a double album. It has 4 songs altogether, like Hemispheres does, but unlike Hemispheres, as I've said, this is a double album, with each song on the album taking up a side of vinyl, or 2 songs taking up a single CD, or any of that weird stuff on cassette tapes. Again, I don't know how cassette tapes work for double albums and really just in general, but you know, I do know that if you were going to buy this album on vinyl, you would have 4 sides of vinyl. So my indication was that there would be 2 records in total. And then on CD, you would have, like the deluxe set, for example, you would have the 2 CDs, each having 2 songs on them, and then you would have a 3rd CD with like some Blu-ray and bonus material and a live version of one of the songs on this record, which is side 4, the song on side 4, Ritual. And again, this is one of the albums that I really wish I owned. Maybe not on vinyl, but you know, maybe just CD. Yeah, because I'm more of a CD guy. I'm not really that big of an expert on vinyl as of yet. And as I've said when I talked about Yes before, I own 3 of their albums. I own Going for the One, Fragile, and 90125, but I don't own Tales, I don't own Close to the Edge, I don't own Relayer. Those are 3 albums that I definitely want to own, especially Tales. And well, we're gonna figure that. We're gonna get more into detail in the review. Now, when it comes to the musicianship of this album, it is, in my opinion, the best musicianship that Yes has had throughout their career. And I know a lot of their previous albums and a couple of their following albums. I said this when I reviewed Relayer, or something on the lines of that. Yes has always had amazing musicianship on all of their 70s albums, and some of their later albums throughout their later part of their career. But it was mostly during their 70s days that they were just on fire, and especially their mid-70s records. Basically, from Fragile to Going for the One, the musicianship from Yes was just so amazing. And I guess you can also make the case for the Yes album to be included in that bunch as well. Which I'm going to make, because, at this point, everything was just kind of there. And, they were already into this similar format, because, on the previous album, Close to the Edge, that you had a lot of, hints of where Yes was going to go into future albums. And in my opinion, the Close to the Edge album was kind of like a foreshadowing of Tales from Topographic Oceans. Ironically, Tales came out right after Close to the Edge. And a lot of Yes fans see this as like a step down from the band, because, it is going to be extremely tough to follow up an album that is Close to the Edge, because Close to the Edge is a really, really, really great album. It's not my favorite Yes album. It's not really a top 3 album for me from Yes, but it is in my top 5. I love that album. I do think it has its weaknesses, though. However, I see no weaknesses here on Tales from Topographic Oceans. And that's why I think that Tales was a much better album than Close to the Edge, or is a better album than Close to the Edge, even though Close to the Edge in its own self is freaking phenomenal. Now, after all of this talking, let's get into the tracks. So right away, Tales from Topographic Oceans opens up with a banger, The Revealing Science of God, Dance of the Dawn, which I will go ahead and say is my favorite Yes song of all time. I never get tired of hearing this track, and it gives me goosebumps every time I listen to this track. I personally prefer the longer version with the Close to the Edge sound effects with those ocean waves and those volume pedal work by Steve Howe. Speaking of which, this album is the first to feature my favorite lineup of Yes, with John Anderson on vocals and percussion, auxiliary and things like that. Steve Howe on guitars, Chris Squire on bass, Rick Wakeman on keyboards, and Alan White on drums. This is the last album until Going for the One to feature Rick Wakeman, and this is the first album to feature Alan White, who replaces Bill Bruford, who left the band after Close to the Edge to join King Crimson, who was another big progressive rock band at the time. Now, getting back to the album. Revealing Science of God is a 22.5-minute song, but not a single second is wasted. If you listen to that song more than 2 times, it just goes by very, very quickly. And you could also listen to the shortened version where John Anderson's vocals just start right away and all that quiet stuff is gone. That could also make it happen. And if you're just getting into this record, then I would suggest that you listen to the deluxe version of Side 1 first, and then maybe just listen to it several more times, because it is one of the easier tracks on this record to get onto, at least to get into, if that's even a thing. A lot of Yes fans who love this album, and even some that just kind of feel whatever about this record, depict Revealing Science of God as their favorite side from this record, and I totally agree. It is definitely my favorite side of the album, and it is my favorite pre-Rush progressive epic. And I say that because, well, if you watch my Hemispheres video, you already know. Now, side one is just basically a banger with so many memorable moments on this song. Like, this basically is mainly Steve Howe and Rick Wakeman's song. Like, this is mainly Rick Wakeman's song, and his keyboard work on this song, and really on this album in general, is just the best he's ever done. Best he's ever done. I don't care what anyone says. This is, in my opinion, the best keyboard work that Rick Wakeman has ever done. And I'm so sad that he did not like this album, but I could kind of see where he was going with it. He basically said that, you know, they weren't trying to do a double album. Originally, they were trying to do a single album with, like, 8 minutes and 12, like, song with 8 minutes and 12 minutes and, you know, things like that. But they didn't have enough material for, they had too much material for a single album and not enough for a double, so they just decided to pad and edit some stuff, and you get a double album. So, this album, in terms of album style, was never really supposed to happen. Like, it wasn't supposed to be a double album, but it probably would have been just as good if it was a single album. But, you know, I love it. I freaking love it. Now, before I get off track here again, we're going to move on to side 2, the Remembering, High the Memory. Now, this is definitely a step down from side 1, but it does make certain references to side 1 with the line, they move fast, they tell me, they make references to that, and they even make certain musical references. I mean, a lot of the songs on this record point back to Revealing Science of God, and in my opinion, the reason why they do that is because that song was just so huge, and it's full of memorable licks, and, you know, if you get that memory triggered within your listening status, then this album becomes a more enjoyable listen. This song is definitely very, very soft, except for, like, the middle section where it speeds up and gets a little bit more technical and a little bit faster. But for the most part, this song is just so very soft and light-hearted and very, very intense in a light type of way. And that's another reason why I love this album. It has so many moments where I get goosebumps and chills every time a moment of grandness happens. And on Remembering, that happens more than 3 times. I will say that. And now, side 3, The Ancient, Giants Under the Sun. In my opinion, this is the weakest track on the album, and I know a lot of Yes fans would agree with me on that. But, in of its own self, this is not a terrible song. It's not even an average song. This is a great song. But I just prefer the other 3 songs a little bit more. But holy mackerel, that acoustic Leaves of Green solo that Steve Howe does near the end of the song, one of his best guitar solos ever. I mean, and it's really on solos like that where you can tell that he was a classically trained guitar player. He does, like, finger style. He does, like, a lot of chords. He does, like, a lot of stuff. Like, it kind of reminds me of the main riff of Blackbird by the Beatles, where you have that finger style type of guitar, kind of acoustic session. But Steve Howe just does it, like, 10 times better. And, you know, that really gives The Ancient major boosts for me. A major boost for me. And also, John Anderson, like, right after his guitar solo, it feeds into a beautiful harmony section with the 3 quote-unquote singers, with John Anderson, Chris Squire, and Steve Howe. Those 3 are just a perfect pair when it comes to harmony. And I know Steve Howe's not really the greatest singer in the world, but Chris Squire's got an amazing voice, and of course, we all know John Anderson. He's one of my all-time favorite vocalists. Yeah, for some, his voice might be a little bit, you know, kind of annoying, but I don't get that at all. He just has a beautiful voice, and you know, he was just, born to sing these types of songs. And it's also another reason why I love Tales is because of John Anderson's vocals. In my opinion, this is his peak when it comes to vocal performances. Basically, from Close to the Edge to to Going for the One, he is just absolutely on fire. And Tales is, in my opinion, his best vocal performance. And now we get to my second favorite song on the album, side 4, Ritual, Nous sommes du soleil, which is French for We Are of the Sun. Oh, that song is just so heavy hitting. It starts kind of like the opposite of how Remembering is. Like, with Remembering, it starts out soft and then it gets a little bit faster and then it goes soft again. But on Ritual, it's basically fast and intense at the start, and then there's this crazy, and I mean crazy, percussion. And on YouTube I've seen Yes do live sets of this song, and like Chris Squire's got like a timpani, and of course John Anderson with his little percussion wall right behind his vocal set, and of course Rick Wakeman doing like sound effects on his keyboards, and then Steve Howe coming in and delivering an absolutely tear-infesting part at the very end, which sends off the album in a very emotional way. Just the way John Anderson sings it, complemented by Steve Howe's beautiful guitar work. Oh, it's so emotional. It is just so great. And it's one of the best moments on this album. And, I've talked about Revealing Signs of God and Ritual on my top 10 Yes songs. And I'm basically a little bit... basically repeating myself from that video. Excuse me. From that video. But in and of its own self, this is just amazing. Now, when it comes to weaknesses on this record, I don't really see any major weaknesses with this record. Now, with Close to the Edge, the reason why it holds down a little bit is because I don't really care for the two songs on side 2 very much, which are And You and I and Siberian Kahatru. I mean, they're both great songs, don't get me wrong. They're just not as great as the title track. And, with Tales from Topographic Oceans, it's just, there's little to no weaknesses on this record. If I did have to pick a weakness on this record, and I will say that there is probably one, the cha-cha, cha-cha. That little thing in the Ancient, it kind of does it a little bit too much, just a little bit. And, this album does, go a little bit off course in some places. But again, we get references to other songs on this album. Like I've already said this in Remembering, but on Ritual they do it as well. Like, somewhere in the middle part, right before the percussion section, we basically get the main solo riff from Revealing Signs of God, or at least we get hints to it. He doesn't play the entire solo, but he plays it very, very slowly, and it's kind of like a little bit suspenseful, just very interesting. But overall, this album is a very strong record, and it's my favorite Yes album. It's my favorite early 70s progressive rock album. It is my favorite. It's my second favorite album of all time. The only reason why it is a step down from Hemispheres is because, Hemispheres has just been a part of my life longer, and, as a young Yes fan, as a young fan who just got into Yes, I have listened to this album a lot of times, but it just doesn't hit me as hard as Hemispheres does. And also, I've only been a fan of Yes since 2017, and this album has only been with me since, 2019. Hasn't really been that long, But overall, this album is a masterpiece, and I absolutely adore this record. This is an amazing record, and that is why my final rating of this album is a 10 out of freaking 10. Now, if you're a fan that's just getting into Yes, I would not suggest getting into, I would not suggest this album getting into as a starter, because this album is very, very, very long, at 80 minutes long. It does meander and drift a little bit. If you want to get into Yes, check out some of their more shorter albums, like Fragile, or the Yes album, or 90125, or Going for the One. And then when you feel like you're ready, go listen to Tales. It might take you several listens to get used to it, but once you do, man, oh man, is it ever rewarding. So with that said, this concludes this edition of Magic Metal Mondays. Thank you so much for watching, my fellow YouTube divers. This is WaterDive122 signing out, ready to dive into more fun on YouTube. Thanks for watching.